To most people watching from the outside, India's neighborhood looks like a curse that never ends. Pakistan has been exporting terrorism for 40 years and has never once stopped. China keeps pushing on the borders. Bangladesh, born with India's military support in 1971, has been turning cold. In recent years, Nepal has also been moving closer to China in different ways, and Sri Lanka handed China a strategic port 135 nautical miles from India's southern coast. But India has been handling all of this like a game. And over the past 2 years, India has been playing and winning the game quietly. In 1960, India's Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru signed the Indus Waters Treaty with Pakistan. The deal divided 6 rivers into 2 groups. India kept the 3 eastern rivers. Pakistan got primary rights over the 3 western ones, the Indus, the Jhelum, and the Chenab. In total, Pakistan received about 80% of the water. That alone is extraordinary. These rivers originate in India. They are fed by glaciers sitting inside Indian territory. And India gave away 80% of their water because India believed that generosity would produce peace. It did not produce peace. It produced multiple wars. And 40 years of Pakistan using the guaranteed water supply to irrigate its fields, while its state-sponsored groups attacked Indian civilians year after year. India could not even use the 20% it was legally entitled to. Every time India tried to build a dam or a storage project on those rivers, Pakistan raised objections. Cases went to international courts. Projects were delayed for years. The water India was allowed to store simply flowed into Pakistan. The 3 western rivers carry between 135 and 140 million acre-feet of water through Indian territory every year. India was legally entitled to store 3.6 million acre-feet of that for its own use. In 65 years, it had not stored a single acre-foot, not for lack of desire, because Pakistan blocked every attempt. Then came April 22, 2025. An Islamist group killed 25 Hindu civilians in Pahalgam, Kashmir, selecting their victims by religion before opening fire. Prime Minister Modi announced that the Indus Waters Treaty was being placed in abeyance, suspended. India would no longer consider itself bound by obligations it had honored for 6 decades, while Pakistan used those same 6 decades to kill Indian civilians. Blood and water, India said, cannot flow together. Home Minister Amit Shah said it with no ambiguity. The treaty will never be restored under the current circumstances. Treaty did not just hurt Pakistan, it hit China directly. China had been building something called the Indus Cascade in Pakistan, a chain of 5 giant dams on the Indus River in Gilgit-Baltistan. The dams are named Bunji, Dimar Basha, Dasu, Patan, and Thakot. Together, they would generate over 22,000 megawatts of electricity. For context, that is enormous for a country like Pakistan, where power cuts cripple homes, hospitals, factories, and farms on a daily basis. The total investment was $50 billion of Chinese money. China built this project because the Indus Waters Treaty guaranteed a specific volume of water would flow from Indian territory into the Indus system. The math for the dams only works if that water keeps arriving. The turbines only spin if the river is full. China had built its $50 billion on the assumption that India would keep honoring a treaty that Nehru signed in 1960. India suspended the treaty, and then India started building. After the suspension, India fast-tracked $15 billion in hydropower projects in Jammu and Kashmir on the western rivers that were previously off-limits for any meaningful Indian development. The Ranbir Canal on the Chenab is being doubled in size. Storage dams are being planned on Chenab and Jhelum tributaries. The Salal Dam, which had silted up and was producing electricity far below its 690 megawatt capacity, is being desilted and restored. A new 8.7-kilometer tunnel through the Himachal Pradesh Mountains will divert water from the Chandra River, a Chenab tributary, into the Beast system, which belongs entirely to India. India hit 2 targets with one move. It pressured Pakistan's water supply, and it quietly undermined the financial case for China's largest infrastructure investment in Pakistan without using a single weapon. Pakistan did not accept the suspension quietly. It went everywhere. Pakistani officials warned of a humanitarian crisis for 240 million people. The foreign ministry called the suspension illegal. Pakistan's government threatened that any water stoppage would be treated as an act of war. It rushed to the United Nations Security Council, leaned on the World Bank, and appealed to China for support. India handled each challenge one by one, turning pressure into masterstrokes. The World Bank's current president is Ajay Banga, an Indian American. And when people started saying the bank could step in and force India's hand, he dismissed that idea as nonsense. Because the truth is simple. The World Bank helped bring the Indus Waters Treaty together in 1960, but it does not control the treaty. It was a facilitator, not a boss. It was not a guarantor. It was not an enforcer. And it had no power to order India to continue a treaty that India had suspended for national security reasons. This was the part Pakistan did not want to hear. The old pressure system was not working anymore. India had made its move, and there was no outside referee powerful enough to drag India back. Pakistan also pushed for 2 simultaneous legal cases at the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. India rejected both. India's position was that the court lacked jurisdiction and that India would not participate in a process designed to produce a ruling India considered illegitimate. India had seen this play before. Decades of Pakistani litigation to block Indian hydropower projects one case at a time. India was no longer playing that game. Over a year after the suspension, India has not moved. The projects are being built. The treaty remains in abeyance. And the institutions Pakistan hoped would rescue it produced no binding outcome. Pakistan's government's easiest escape route has always been to blame India. If there is a water shortage, India is the reason. If people protest, the unrest is described as the result of foreign interference rather than domestic failure. But what is currently happening in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir is not about any single shortage or any single crisis. It is about years of accumulated anger. Pakistan-occupied Kashmir produces over 2,300 megawatts of electricity from its own dams, including Mangla and Neelam. But much of that power is transmitted to Punjab province. Locals are left with shortages and high bills, despite sitting on the very dams that generate the electricity. The territory is rich in minerals, forests, and water. The locals see almost none of the revenue. Around 25% of the population is multidimensionally poor. In Gilgit-Baltistan, that figure rises to 43%. Nearly 29% of people are undernourished. On June 8, 2026, massive protests erupted in Rawalakot. At least 11 people were killed in clashes with security forces, and over 70 were injured. Thousands blocked roads and burned tires. They were not demanding luxury. They were demanding basic things at affordable prices, electricity without rationing, and the right to have a voice in decisions about their own land. And in the middle of those protests, Indian flags appeared, openly, in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, with people demanding to merge with India. Then came the China angle, the one that made people even angrier. China has invested heavily in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir through CPEC projects, but most workers and engineers on those projects are Chinese. Local youth see very few jobs. Locals complain that Chinese companies are extracting their minerals, diverting their water, and damaging their environment. Several attacks on Chinese personnel have already taken place. The people of Pakistan-occupied Kashmir feel colonized twice, by Pakistan and by China simultaneously. Pakistan cannot hide the most uncomfortable fact of all. The people it claims to speak for are now speaking against it. They are speaking against it because they can see what is happening across the line of control. After the abrogation of Article 370 in 2019, Jammu and Kashmir in India moved rapidly. The central government's budget for the region has reached approximately $14.5 billion. Compare that with Pakistan, which had to ask the IMF for $7 billion for its entire country. Indian Jammu and Kashmir's GDP is now nearly 3 times larger than Pakistan-occupied Kashmir's. National highways in Indian Jammu and Kashmir are approximately 10 times more than on the Pakistani side. On the Indian side, over 14,000 hospital beds, more than 16,000 doctors, and over 22,000 schools, including IIT Jammu. On the Pakistani side, 589 health centers and approximately 1,000 doctors for the entire region. The people of Pakistan-occupied Kashmir are watching all of this through social media and word of mouth. They see Indian Kashmir getting roads, hospitals, schools, jobs, and tourists, while they face bullets for demanding basic rights. India's own leaders have been clear. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar said POK was, is, and will always remain India's. Defense Minister Rajnath Singh said the development in Jammu and Kashmir will naturally attract the people of Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Home Minister Amit Shah declared that every inch of Pakistan-occupied Kashmir belongs to India. Pakistan built its entire political identity on the claim that it speaks for Kashmiris. The Kashmiris under its administration are raising Indian flags and asking to come home. Pakistan is not the only neighbor where India made a decisive move with minimal noise. In Nepal, India changed the entire game with one piece of paper. Nepal has a remarkable natural endowment. Rivers flowing from Himalayan glaciers with enough water and gradient to generate approximately 83,000 megawatts of hydropower in theory, and over 42,000 megawatts that can actually be built profitably. Nepal's dream is to become the battery of South Asia, to generate far more power than its 30 million people need, and sell the surplus to India and Bangladesh. The plan is not unrealistic. The rivers are there. The potential is there. The problem is money. Building large hydropower dams costs billions. Nepal does not have billions. So Nepal looked for investors. China came in aggressively under the Belt and Road Initiative, promising to fund large dams and power plants. On paper, it looked like a development story. In practice, it was a strategic play. Nepal's rivers flow into India. They contribute roughly 45% of the total water in the Ganga, rising to 70% in some stretches during the dry season. The Ganga feeds nearly 600 million people across northern India. Any significant control over Nepali river dams is indirect control over water that northern India depends on. India identified the leverage point, and India issued a policy guideline on cross-border electricity trade. The rule was simple. India would not purchase power from any hydropower project in Nepal that had significant Chinese investment, Chinese equipment, or Chinese operational control. That single document made China's investment almost worthless overnight, because Nepal has no other buyer. Nepal's electricity cannot go north into China. The Himalayas make it physically impossible. Nepal cannot reach Bangladesh without crossing Indian transmission lines, which require India's permission. Even the 40 megawatts Nepal was already exporting to Bangladesh was running through India's grid on India's terms. Nepal had no choice. Chinese companies were removed from several large projects worth billions of dollars. Indian firms replaced them. China had invested enormous capital to build a strategic presence in the headwaters of the Ganga. India wrote a policy guideline. India won. India's neighborhood policy is not only about stopping China, it is also about showing countries that working with India brings trust, stability, development, and long-term security. And the clearest example of this is Bhutan. Bhutan built most of its hydropower capacity with Indian loans. India bought the power at fair prices. Bhutan's electricity revenue funded schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. Bhutan grew economically without surrendering its sovereignty, without handing over territory, without finding itself trapped in debt it could not repay. Compare that with what Chinese investment has produced elsewhere. Sri Lanka built a port with Chinese loans and could not repay. It handed over Hambantota on a 99-year lease. Pakistan took Chinese CPEC money and is still managing the debt burden. Laos took Chinese investment for dams and came close to losing control of its own electricity grid. Myanmar built Chinese infrastructure and became economically dependent in ways China has not hesitated to leverage. China builds to create dependency. India builds to create capability. The difference is visible in the results. And this is not just a story about India's backyard. The same contrast, India builds to enable, China builds to entrap, is now playing out across the entire world. Because China's most ambitious global project has quietly turned into a catastrophe. In 2013, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative, a plan to connect China to the rest of the world through roads, railways, ports, and pipelines. Over 140 countries signed up. Total commitments crossed $1 trillion. For a moment, it looked like the most ambitious development program in human history. China became the world's biggest lender in many regions, lending more than all other countries combined. 12 years later, the picture looks very different. Studies now show that 60 to 80% of China's overseas loans are held by countries that are struggling to repay them. China has been forced to provide $240 billion in bailouts through new loans and restructuring arrangements just to keep those countries from defaulting entirely. In 2025 alone, the world's 75 poorest countries paid China a record $22 billion in debt repayments, pulling money away from schools, hospitals, and food programs to service loans taken for projects that often did not deliver what was promised. The failed projects are not hard to find. Montenegro took a Chinese loan for a highway. A billion-dollar road that was never finished, suffered from corruption, and left the country unable to repay. Ecuador built a hydroelectric dam with Chinese financing near an active volcano. The dam developed over 7,000 cracks, and the construction quality was so poor that Ecuador spent years seeking legal recourse. Kenya's Standard Gauge Railway, one of the most celebrated BRI projects in Africa, now runs at a persistent loss. And Sri Lanka's Hambantota port, built with Chinese loans in a location that had minimal existing trade, earned far less revenue than the projections ever suggested, eventually forcing Sri Lanka to hand over the port on a 99-year lease in a debt-for-equity swap. The loan terms that produced these outcomes were designed to benefit China, not the borrowers. Many loans carried variable interest rates, unusual in global development finance, that shot up sharply when global interest rates rose after COVID and during the inflation years that followed. Hundreds of billions in additional debt were kept off the official books, making it impossible for borrowing countries to understand the full extent of their obligations until the repayment demands arrived. And some deals tied repayments to commodity prices, leaving countries exposed when those prices fell. What started as a strategy to extend Chinese influence and export China's surplus industrial capacity has instead revealed deep structural weaknesses in the Chinese lending model. China is no longer seen as a generous investor. It is increasingly described as the world's largest official debt collector, demanding repayment from the very countries whose development it claimed to be supporting at a time when those countries can least afford to pay. As China's Belt and Road became a debt trap with a trillion-dollar price tag, India built alternatives, not to compete with China's scale, to offer something fundamentally different: connectivity that does not come with hidden obligations. The India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, announced in 2023 and being actively developed, links India to the Gulf and then to Europe through a combination of rail, road, and port infrastructure that bypasses several traditional choke points entirely. It is a multilateral project, developed transparently with multiple governments involved in governance and oversight. The International North-South Transport Corridor is a 7,200-kilometer multimodal route, combining sea, rail, and road links that connects India directly to Russia and Europe via Iran and the Central Asian states. For landlocked Central Asian countries that have long depended on Chinese-dominated infrastructure networks to reach global markets, the INSTC offers shorter travel times and lower costs through a route that no single country controls. India's approach to these projects reflects the same principles Modi described at the G7 in Evian. Dignity, not dependency. Indian connectivity projects emphasize full transparency in agreements, strict environmental and social standards, genuine technology transfer to host countries, creation of local jobs rather than importing Chinese labor, and, crucially, no strategic asset seizures if a country faces repayment difficulties. India's relationships with the UAE, with Gulf nations, with African partners, and with Central Asian states are built on this model. India-UAE bilateral trade alone has now reached approximately $85 billion and is growing rapidly. The India-UAE Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, concluded in record time, is widely cited as a template for what a fair, mutually beneficial trade agreement looks like. No hidden debt, no port leases, no 99-year concessions, just trade on terms both sides agreed to. Countries that took Chinese BRI loans and found themselves unable to repay are now looking at what India offers. The comparison is not abstract. Sri Lanka needed India's emergency financial support during its 2022 collapse, not China's. Countries in Central Asia are routing more trade through the INSTC rather than Chinese rail networks. African nations that borrowed for BRI projects are having difficult conversations about debt restructuring with Chinese banks. India is, for many of them, the more reliable partner they wish they had chosen first. The world did not wake up to this overnight. India has been building these relationships, these corridors, and this reputation, quietly, consistently, without dramatic announcements, for over a decade. The difference between India's model and China's is not just about finance. It is about what a partnership is supposed to be. China offered infrastructure and got leverage. India offered partnership and is getting credibility. The India-China relationship is the most complicated bilateral engagement India manages. It is not friendship. It is not open hostility. It is a managed rivalry between two civilizational giants with an unresolved border, deep trade interdependence, and a fundamental disagreement about who leads Asia. After the 2020 Galwan Valley confrontation, in which 20 Indian soldiers died, the relationship froze. Patrolling rights were suspended. The Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, one of Hinduism's most sacred pilgrimages to Mount Kailash in Lake Mansarovar in Tibet, was shut down. By 2025, both sides had enough reasons to cautiously rebuild. Disengagement at the contested Depsang and Demchok areas was completed. When India's new ambassador Vikram Daiwami took charge in May 2026, his first trip outside Beijing was to Lhasa. The stated purpose was logistics for the Kailash Mansarovar pilgrimage, which is being restored after years of closure. But the choice of destination is the signal. For tens of millions of Indian Hindus, Mount Kailash is among the holiest places on earth. When China closed it for political reasons, it was felt as a wound. A foreign government blocking a path Indians had walked for thousands of years before either modern state existed. Restoring it says, both sides want a working relationship, not a frozen standoff. India will engage with China. India will restore pilgrimages and maintain working mechanisms. And India will keep watching what China actually does. Because what China does, not what China says, is what matters. Trust but verify, applied to the Himalayas. Look at all of it together. Each move by India is quiet. Each move is precise. Each move creates facts on the ground that no amount of money or diplomatic pressure can easily undo. And each move, if you look carefully, hits more than one target at once. The IWT suspension hit Pakistan and China simultaneously. The Nepal policy paper hit China and kept Nepal on India's terms simultaneously. The IMEC and INSTC offer the world an alternative to the debt traps China built, while giving India permanent connectivity through regions it previously had limited reach into. Pakistan spent 65 years blocking India from using its own water. India suspended the treaty and started building. Pakistan cannot bomb a tunnel inside Indian territory without triggering consequences it cannot survive. And in the territory Pakistan has administered for 75 years, its own people are raising Indian flags and asking to come home. China invested $1 trillion across 140 countries and is now widely seen as the world's largest debt collector. India built transparent corridors with no hidden obligations, and the countries that borrowed from China are now looking at what India's model actually delivers. This is not accidental. This is a doctrine. India finds the leverage point. India builds the lever quietly over years if necessary. And then India uses it, not to humiliate, not to start a war, but to change the terms permanently in ways that serve India's interests and cannot easily be reversed. India studied its neighborhood, and India built around it. And that is why India's rise is not happening by accident. It is happening because India is thinking long-term, acting with patience, and choosing its moments carefully. Thank you for watching this through to the end. If this gave you something to think about, Share it with someone who needs to see it. Like, subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.